We're going to start off where I left off from my intro video. In that video, I went through the fact that we are going to create a full Web3 marketplace, wallet, private addresses, the works. But in good fashion, we are going to do this one small step at a time over a video series. This first set of videos is going to be around IPFS, and there's a specific platform I use for that, Pinata.cloud. And this is where we're going to store our images. Let me give you a view of what that looks like. So in my Pinata.cloud account, I've obviously been doing some testing, and these are all images stored on their IPFS servers. They're pinned, which means I've got a reference to them. And if I click on one of those, you'll see that it's just a normal image. It's probably not the best one. That is just a screen clip of the Mac background. Let me show you one that looks more like an image. So we're going to be uploading images, whatever you happen to have. I've got some garden images and things like that. And the purpose for this is these images are going to be minted as NFTs later in our series. And then you can add those NFTs to your own marketplace and sell them on a blockchain. I'm going to be using the Polygon blockchain. It's got fast transactions, it's cheap. Most of that won't matter in this series because I'm going to be using their testnet, which means it's for testing, and none of the gas fees are real money. I'll show you how to get the Matic tokens to actually pay for the gas fees as we do stuff. But as a starting point, if you want to sell stuff on your own marketplace, you need stuff to sell. And so that's what we're going to start with. So I would expect at this point you have a Xano account. I'm in my Xano account right now, and that you have a Pinata.cloud account. And that should be about all we need to get this rolling. So the first thing we're going to need is the API keys. So let me go ahead and go into the API keys for Pinata.cloud. We'll also look at the Pinata documentation as we do the API. And the reason I mention that is their key here, these two keys, are public. Obviously, I'm showing those to you. And then the hidden secret and JWT token, which I'll create here in a second, are something that you should not share with other people. Consider this key to be equivalent of a user ID. And then the secret is the equivalent of the password, so shouldn't share it. And the JWT token is an encoded, not encrypted, but encoded version of this public key and the secret. And that JWT token will make it easy for us to do API calls, which you'll get to see all that. So I'm actually going to go through the process and create a key. As you might guess, since I'm going to be showing you the secret and the token, I will be revoking those at the end of the video, so you don't have to worry about seeing if I've left them available for you on my account. Okay, so we're going to do all admin access to APIs. We're not going to limit any max uses. And then we are going to give it a name, Web3 tutorial. And so what'll pop up here is the screen that has the public key as well as the secret and the encoded version of those two. I'm going to go ahead and copy those. You'll want to make sure you track the secret and the JWT token because you won't be able to get access to them after this. And so stick them in a text editor and save them or do something. We'll also be putting them in Xano, which will kind of save them, but I wouldn't consider that kind of like your permanent saving place. Let's see, I've copied, I've got that information. We now have the Web3 tutorial here. We're going to go back into Xano and we are going to start building out the initial APIs. So the starting point is in settings, because like I just mentioned, you want to save that information we just got from Pinata.cloud. And so let's see, Pinata API key, and I'll paste in the values here shortly. Pinata secret, Pinata JWT. Okay, got the information that I copied and pasted into an editor. So here's the API key. Make sure I get all that information. Copy and paste the whole thing, which I guess I will find out once we try to use it. See here. Now this one, I've got a little too much information on the front, so I'm going to clean that up. There we go. Okay, so we have what we need to be able to call into the APIs. I am not going to, you can see I was doing testing here. I've got an empty API endpoint. I'm going to go ahead and delete that so that I pretty much look the same way that you do in your account. There we go. We're not going to be using any of the auth or user information that was automatically created for me when I created this Xano workspace. I did create the workspace with email for authentication. That'll be here for us later in the series. What I'm going to focus on is functions. What I found that works best for me is, as opposed to building the logic directly into an API, I'll build small little functions and then I'll call those from the API. It makes it easier for reuse and a little bit of cleaner area just to kind of work through the bugs. So let's see here, Pinata auth test, and I'll tell you why we're creating this, doing it in a little bit reverse order, but this is going to be the first function we work with. Pinata.cloud in their documentation for, let's find where that is. There we go. In their API documentation. So I'm in docs.pinata.cloud. If I come down to Pinata APIs, we're going to start with authentication. And they've got some good documentation. They've got a video that shows you how to do all this. There is a test, here it is, test authentication API that we're going to be using to show that the JWT token that we're using works. So it's a nice, simple little API. And I'm going to come down to the curl command here. And this will be the API that we're testing against. So I'm going to go over and click the copy up in the corner. And we're going to switch back over to what I just created, which is Pinata_auth test. And we're going to start by adding an item to the function stack in Xano for this function. We're obviously doing an external API call. And if you haven't used the magic of the import curl, you're going to like this because most good API documentation has curl for an example for you to test with. I got this from Pinata.cloud just now. You saw me copy that, paste it in here, import, and it sets up the method, the URL. It pulls off the authorization bearer token structure. And so all I need to change in this is to use the authorization bearer token, which is equivalent to the JWT token. And I'm going to switch back over here and just kind of show you where you can get some of that info. So if I'm at the top, it's definitely worth reading through all of this. It gives you some good idea of what Pinata is doing for authentication. Here's the information I was telling you about the key, secret, and JWT token. And then this is the area where it lets you know that your JWT token is part of your authorization header in the API call we're doing as a bearer token. And so what we're going to do is back in Xano, where we've added that header, we're going to go in and add our information so that the API call works. We're going to do a %s. The %s along with a filter called sprintf will allow me to do variable substitution. So sprintf is from normal programming languages, but really all we're doing here is We're going to pick the environment variable we just got done setting up. And it is going to be the Pinata JWT. And so what you see here now is that where there is a %S, we're telling this filter to replace it with the JWT token. So that'll create the correct bearer token in the authorization header for this call. I want to make sure I save it. I don't want to lose the work I did. And then I'm always I don't like to leave the API_1 sitting around. So I am going to label our output. I can type auth test. Then I'm going to change the response that we're sending to that same variable in Xano. Okay, so at this point, that should be all there is to it. If I go into run and debug and hit run, if all goes well, we'll get a 200, and we did. So as you can see here, Pinata.cloud is telling us that we have the correct authentication information to call their APIs. So that's really all we're going to use that for. That one's pretty much done. You could delete it, or you could leave it in your list to show that you've got more than one successful function after we move on to this next one. So the next thing we're going to do, if I switch back over to Pinata.cloud, is we're going to upload an image and pin it into Pinata's IPFS Web3 server environment. And as I'd mentioned before, this is the first step in being able to mint your own NFTs and sell them in your own marketplace. And I should mention that by own marketplace, I mean that you do not have to send your minted NFTs into something like OpenSea and use their marketplace where they take a fee. You get to control your whole environment, your whole, call it a virtual retail store, your own product, selling all of that. I guess technically, if you wanted, you could allow other people to sell their NFTs in your marketplace as well. But the goal of this is to give you complete control over your whole environment of selling NFTs. So let's keep cruising along instead of pontificating. What we're going to do next is we're going to pin, we'll just call it Pinata pinning add. We're going to pin a file. So there's a number of steps in this one. There's some JSON that you'll need to understand, and I'll go through all of that. But let me just start with the inputs that we're going to have. We're going to want to have a name for our file. We are going to want to have a description. And so I'm just adding text fields to the inputs for this function that will be used in an API. And then the other part that I need is the actual file. So that'll be down in the storage input, and it will be a file resource. And we'll just call it file. Okay, those are the three inputs that we need. The next thing we need to do is go back over to the documentation in Pinata. And instead of working with the authentication, we're going to move down to pinning. And we're going to want to pin a file or directory. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more complicated on how we have to bring this data into Xano for the API. But for now, we're going to do the exact same steps for this API pinning file to IPFS. If you wanted to see all the parameters, come over here and click. It'll expand it out, and you can see those. But we're going to start our normal curl command. We're going to copy it. Going to go back over to Xano. And to the function stack, we're going to add our external API request and import our curl command. What is going to happen here is these form items are not going to be imported. And I'm going to show you how we overcome that. Because there will be some curl commands, even though it is nice and magic to be able to import it, sometimes it just doesn't fully work. Curl can have a lot of different parameters and such, and they may not get all recognized. And you'll see here that I have my authorization token. And while I'm looking at that, I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing to that. that we did on our auth test. I put the %s. I come in here and get the sprint f, and I'm adding the environment variable for Pinata JWT. So we'll now have authentication set up correctly, but we need to set up the parameters we're setting in that will be the file, the name, and the description. Let me see what I can show here. Let's start with this. You'll see that in this curl form parameter, there is a JSON structure right in here. And what we need to do is recreate that in Xano. And then there's also another one right here. This is the data that Pinata is going to use to pin your file to their system. And let me show you, we've got the CID version. That's a content identifier. I won't get into a lot of that right now, just other than to say it's a uniquely hashed ID for the specific image you're uploading. A Web3 specific concept and what they're doing and why on this, but it's content addressable image. And then there's the Pinata metadata, which is going to be the name, and then key values, which are name and description for us, company in this example. So let's go back to one of these images, and I'm going to come over to the more. So we're in Pinata.cloud, and I'm going to edit details, and I'm going to show you this because here is the name that we sent up, and then the key information, which is name and description. This is what we're creating in what I'm going to show you next. This is where it goes in Pinata.cloud so that you can confirm that that information has been sent correctly. So what I'm going to do is cheat a little bit, because why not? Just to make this a little more interesting. I have some JSON already defined that I've manually built, and I'll show you how to do that on your own. But for now, just to keep us moving, I'll also show you a very nice feature of Xano. If I want to import a JSON structure and not set it one at a time, I can come in and pick action. You'll see I cleared out this content here, and I'm picking action, and I'm going to import the JSON that I have. So this is what we just saw on the other screen in Pinata.cloud, but in a JSON structure, a nice clean JSON structure instead of that -- form encoded structure. And it has the Pinata options, the CID version, and then the metadata. And you'll see I've got the name and I've got key values. And let's say this is web tutorial 01, in case we have to do it more than once. And then I'm going to give this. Notice I'm using a convention for the name that shows up in the cloud. I'm putting the file extension on it for a PNG, and then I'm keeping it nice and simple. This is the name of an image file, and then just a straight up name without the extension here. Let's see here, keep that in case I want it. Let's import that. Okay, so this is what you would have normally had to build manually, which isn't hard to be honest, but why not make it easier? We're using the filter set so that we can create in the parameters a JSON object, as you see here, with the Pinata options and Pinata metadata information stored on it. So this is the exact same thing you saw in the JSON, but set up for parameters for this external API call. So at this point, I have a post with the API information. There we go. I've set my parameters. I've set my authentication. I'm going to save this because if I didn't, I'd have to redo it. And then, of course, let's say that we want this to be pin added. Always trying to kind of self-document with what's going on because sometimes these functions get pretty complicated. Pin added, we're going to add that as a response. And so if I've done everything correctly as I've been chatting through this, we should have what we need to call this function and see it show up in Pinata.cloud. So let me pick an image to use. Let's see here. Do I have a good image? Let's go to downloads. been messing with Dolly a little bit. Let's see, that'll be a fun one. Let's pick that image and Dolly image. I guess it won't matter here. I should add this so that you can see won't show up. I'll show you that currently we're not using the name and the description here. We have it hard-coded in the API call, but we're going to fix that before this is over. I'm going to run this. It's always a good sign when it takes a second or two. Oh, but not that good of a sign. I messed something up. I want a 200 for success. I got a 400. Invalid request format. So let's see what we've done wrong here. As you know, every once in a while I get to debug with you because I think I got it all right, but I do not. Okay, so if I have an incorrect request format, it's either going to be in my JSON structure that I've built. Oh, and I know what it is. Or it's going to be the fact that I don't have a complete structure. You see that I have parameters, Pinata options, and metadata. You would think that it would be good that if in the API, I also set the file that we want to upload, which I didn't do. So I'm going to add to the parameters. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to set, and I believe it's called file in Pinata. And then I am going to pick the file that we're doing input. So in essence, what I was doing is attempting to pin a file without sending a file. And so now I rerun this, repick the file. So Xano makes it easy for you to do testing. They let you just browse and pick your own file. You can also do this through front ends and stuff. And actually, if you want to know what it looks like to do that from a front end, my prior video series on the App Guide for Xano to do application will show you how to upload images. So you can go find that title out of those multiple videos. You can find the very specific one on how to upload images if you want to know how to do that from a front end. I'm going to run. It's going to take a second or two. And look at that, much better. We have a valid status return. And I know that it all worked, not only because I got a 200, but the result from Pinata.cloud is showing my CID, or the IPFS unique hash on their servers. So kind of pay attention to what this is. There's nothing secret about this. It's actually public information. Tells me the size of the image and when it happened. So now the real test is, let's remember, the easy part here, a WYOQ. If I come over here and refresh Pinata, I will see WYOQ. We could confirm this whole thing, and if you want to, you can, but I'm pretty sure they match because now we have our new Web Tutorial 01 PNG, and it is one of the Dolly images that I had just shown, that an AI generated image, and that is now pinned in the cloud. And actually, if you wanted to, you could do a search for this CID. And this is actually a really important fact that I probably should share a number of times through my videos. This CID is publicly available to anybody who wants to go to an IPFS tool like Pinata.cloud and search for it. You could put in this CID and it would find this image that I just uploaded. So all of these images that you upload to any IPFS server, Pinata.cloud being one of those very useful environments that we're using, anybody can see this. And that is the purpose of IPFS. So that's not a broken, it is the purpose, well worth reading about. But Pinata does give you a paid for option to do what they call submarining it. And if I submarine it, it's private, and you'll see that none of these are private. Now, I do happen to have a paid account with them, and I can submarine it. I probably won't do that in this series because I try to keep things free that I demo, but it's very useful if you want to publish images that you do not want to make publicly available. And they've got some really nice, if you look at submarine.me on the web, some really nice tools to publish your tokens. Okay, enough of that. What we've just successfully done is I'll go back in and see. We have actually pinned an image in a Web3 environment just within the first, I don't know, what are we, 20 or 30 minutes in here. Okay, so let's go back to the Xano API and do some cleanup. So this is all it took. We have what we need, but I'm not using name and description yet. Let's make that work. So I'm going to come into the parameters, go down, and I'm going to change the file name from being hard-coded to being a name that we passed in. Since I was using .png, I'm going in and adding a filter, and I'm going to concatenate .png so it shows up that way. I know what my file type is. I don't know if that's a standard convention to use on an IPFS server. I may learn differently later, but for now, let's go ahead and do that. And then I want to change the name here where I had it hard-coded. This is the metadata that shows up. That is going to be name. And then the description, we don't want that hard-coded. So let's go ahead and clear that out and pick description. And then let's just rerun this because there's something I want to share in rerunning. If I remember which image I used, pretty sure it was the first one. If I rerun this, everything will work fine. I use the exact same image, and you will see, let's see if I did use the right image. We go down to the bottom, you'll see a new parameter here, is duplicate. The reason you're seeing that is we uploaded the exact same binary image, to the bit. And the CID is created out of a hash of all of those bytes in the image, and it sees that it's the exact same one. And so it lets you know that by saying true. And if I come over here and refresh my screen, you'll see that I don't have a new image. And that's because content addressable images means that the image is the unique thing that's being addressed. It's not like a web page where for a web page, if I have a URL pointing directly at this web tutorial 01.png and I give you that URL, then you can get to the image, but I also, as the owner of that URL, could change the image, and then you could never get back to this one that I have here. With content addressable, this address, if I were to change the image, I'd get a new address, meaning that if I sold somebody this address, this image is always at the end of that address. They're not independent. And that's what makes Web3 and IPFS and CIDs a great way to mint NFTs, because you can't swap out the image. This is what you get. And so that's why you see that this is still the exact same image to the bit and byte. Now, that being said, if I wanted to test what I just did here in Xano, I'm going to need to do that with a different image, which we can do. Now let's see what this one looks like. Oh, that's cool. We'll go with the flower. We'll know that's different. And then I've got the name and description that hasn't been used yet, and I'm going to run that. I'm going to confirm that I got a 200 and I got a hash. So that means everything's good. We're going to go ahead, and there it is. That's the name. Let's confirm it's the right image. That's the image. Let's confirm that my metadata is correct. There is my Dolly image.png. There is Dolly image, and this won't show up, but it will because it's supposed to. So let's go back. That all matches. Okay, so at this point, we have everything we need to pin an image. Let's give a quick thought here and see if there's anything of interest we might want to do. You know what we might want to do real quick is to start saving what we've done in a database, which to do that, guess what? You need to create one, a table. So what I'm going to do is after the API call, I want to call an add to a database table to store the IPFS hash, the name, and the description of what I just did, so that as we keep building this out, we've got a reference to all that. I mean, this over in Pinata.cloud will stay there for me unless I get rid of it, but it'll give me a way to more quickly reference that information in what we're doing. So let's go into the database, and we're going to add IPFS media. I don't want API CRUD endpoints for that. I got rid of the checkbox. Okay, so we're in that table. Let's keep this simple. We want the CID. We want just creating text versions of all this like we did for the input parameters. Have the name and description. Okay. Then you know what we're going to do? One more thing. We're going to store from down on the bottom the raw JSON. I've learned, especially when I'm in the process of building, that when I'm calling APIs and storing the data, it's very helpful to store the full response, because if I ever need to go clean stuff up, I can loop back through my whole table and reference that data and make adjustments if I need to. And it's a good debugging technique. I don't think I would keep it this way in production because it wastes a lot of storage space, but we're not in production, so it'll be a good thing. So IPFS media is the table. We're going to go back to our library and our pinning add function, and we're going to add a new database request to add a record to IPFS media. The timestamp will be automatically created for us. The CID is coming out of IPFS media. The name and description, since I used name in my table and I used it in the input, Xano is nice enough to automatically connect those, so I don't need to do anything there. And then I need to get the JSON data. Now, if I were to do a guess, I know that my IPFS or my pin added is the variable. And then I want to use get to get a path. And I think we'll confirm this, but we're going to guess to start with. Response.result.IPFS hash. We'll confirm that that's the exact right one, but I'm going to guess to see if I can't get there. And then for this one, we're going to do the exact same. Oops. We're going to do our get. Actually, I don't need to do it. We're going to store all the JSON, so I don't need to do that. I'm going to grab the whole thing, the whole response out of that API, and we'll save that. And before I go adding stuff, I'll comment it out. And we're going to rerun this to confirm our JSON. We will just use one of the same images and run it. We'll get our is duplicate and such, but we'll come down here. The response, I'm not interested in the headers. The response result is what we're going to get. And what I'm going to do, I should have done before, I'm going to copy this full result. And on a different screen, I don't think that's probably showing up, but on a different screen, I've got a text editor that I'm using to store some of these notes and activities I do during this video. So I stored off that full result, so I've got that to reference. The other thing that I'll mention, do a little experiment here. Xano actually has a really nice feature for if I copy the result of an API request like that, they make it straightforward to pull that information out as opposed to doing it like I did here with response result, the IPFS hash. And I'll show that, not here, we're going to keep rolling, but I'll show that in a subsequent video on how you can import that information and not have to guess. So let's save this, uncomment it. And if I rerun this, we should have something show up in our table to be the tracking. Okay, so we got our 200 is duplicate, everything worked there. Let's come back over to the database table. And there's my created app, here's my CID. and the image info. And if I double click on the JSON, there's the full result. Okay, so now we've got the data stored that we can use later, whenever we want to in a front end we create, or subsequent APIs, or Xano queries and searches. So I think we're going to call that good for this one. In good fashion, I've gone longer than I wanted, but we've got a really strong start here. You've got your test you did, but more importantly, you've created a pinned image out on a Web3 environment in Pinata Cloud for IPFS stuff. So what we're going to do is the next set of videos is going to go down a path of Tatum.io. So now that I've got images to work with, and let me go out to Tatum.io. You're going to want to set up an account if you have not already in Tatum, because Tatum is the magic that gets us into create our own wallet, our own public key, our own public address for that wallet for the blockchain called Polygon. We're going to have a private address that lets us transact. We're going to do that in the test net. And then more fun, we are going to publish our own contracts to the blockchain so that we can, so that we can mint NFTs. So our starting point in the next one will probably be using the Tatum IOs to set up our wallet and our public and private addresses that we need to mess with contracts and NFTs on the Polygon blockchain. So feel free to do some reading in between on some of those topics. Make sure you show up to the next video with your Tatum.io account. Feel free to watch some of their videos. They've got some really good videos on how this works, but I will step you through it as it relates to Xano. Appreciate your time.